Hello everyone, I'm Kim Gusby. We are interrupting your normal programming with some breaking news. After several months, the South Carolina Supreme Court has just made a ruling on disbarred attorney Alex Murdaugh's murder conviction. WSAV's Andrew Davis has been covering this story from the very beginning when Murdaugh's wife and son were found dead at the Moselle estate in Colleton County back in 2021. He joins us now live from our Low Country Bureau inside the Culinary Institute of the South in Bluffton with an update. Good morning, Andrew. What's the latest?
Well, Kim, almost 5 years exactly to the date that Maggie and Paul Murdaugh were found dead. Today, Alex Murdaugh has been granted a new trial by the South Carolina Supreme Court for the murder conviction that happened back in 2023. The Supreme Court just came out with their decision literally just a few moments ago. Reading a little bit for you, they said that actually both the defense and the prosecution did an excellent job, but they were sidetracked by one person, Clerk of Court Becky Hill, who then tainted the jurors and made this decision happen. They said this complicated and high-profile matter, their efforts were in vain because Colleton County Clerk of Court placed her fingers on the scales of justice, it reads in this opinion, thereby denying Murdaugh his right to a fair trial by an impartial jury. And they said, although we're aware of the time, the money, the effort expended for this lengthy trial, we have no choice but to reverse the denial of Murdaugh's motion for a new trial due to Hill's improper external influences on the jury and remand for a new trial. What this basically means is Becky Hill was accused of tampering with this jury, that she told them, don't listen to everything that Alex Murdaugh had to say, that the defense had to say, that don't be fooled by it was one of the words she used. And there was enough there in the Supreme Court's mind to affect multiple jurors, one that had been taken off the jury already, others that were still there and may very well have tainted their opinion. Now, we've already been through this appeal on a lower court once, and Judge Toll kicked it up to the actual Supreme Court itself, who made this decision. You're seeing there Creighton Waters, the prosecutor from the Attorney General's office, who was deeply involved in all this, as well as the attorneys for Alex Murdaugh, of course, Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin. There's Becky Hill herself. She came off as a key figure in a lot of this during the time she was writing a book. And there's believed that she was writing this book and tampered with this jury with the idea that would help her book sales, was the claim by the defense. And right now it appears that the South Carolina Supreme Court agreed with this decision. You're looking at various things as we dig through a document that is dozens of pages long to make sure we get the whole background with everything that was going on. He was, of course, convicted back in March of 2023 for the murders of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh in the property of Moselle itself in Colleton County right there. Now, looking at everything they're talking about, they also talked about the financial crimes information and evidence that was presented during the trial. The defense had brought this out, saying this should have never been presented to begin with, and helped tamper again with this case and did not give him a fair trial. The court itself did not directly rule on this, instead focusing on the jury tampering as the reason behind Murdaugh getting this new trial, but did say some of the evidence that was presented in that case should not have been allowed when it comes to some of those financial crimes, because it was not germane, it was not connected to the murders itself. The judges did want to make sure they made a very specific opinion at the end of this, as I scroll through to look at it, in their conclusions, saying that it was Hill's shocking jury interference accomplished outside the presence and knowledge of the outstanding trial judge and superbly competent and professional counsel for both the state and defense. So they did not put any of this on the jury. Instead, it is all on Becky Hill's tampering with this jury and the effect it may have had on jurors in this case. And that means Alex Murdaugh is in line for a new case, a new trial for himself. To complicate this further, Alex has already been sentenced in federal court to 40+ years. So there's still a question on whether this next trial will ever go on again, or will they just remand him to the federal prison instead, something that could play into this into the future. This was a multi-million-dollar trial for everyone involved, including the state. The other question is, how is Alan Wilson going to react? The Attorney General, who's now running for governor, has to react to this decision, because this This was his big point. He was able to put Alex Murdaugh behind bars for this high-profile murder. Does this affect his candidacy? What will he have to say about the decision by the Supreme Court, and will he want to go ahead with a further trial? So once again, Alex Murdaugh has been granted a new trial by the South Carolina Supreme Court in big part, due to the fact of the apparent tampering by the Colleton County Clerk of Court, Becky Hill. Kim, this is a big decision. This is a huge statement by the South Carolina Supreme Court in this case. Not fully unexpected by many of the people who follow this, but at the same time, still to overturn a murder conviction and say he deserves a new trial is a huge statement.
Andrew, help us understand this a little more. What exactly does this mean? You mentioned the evidence that's already been presented. Does this mean new testimony, more evidence? What does this mean for the case?
I think that's what we're going to figure out in the next couple weeks, especially. I think they're going to have to limit a lot of this financial crimes evidence that they brought in to begin with, because that was part of this appeal. And the justices made sure to say some of it shouldn't have been allowed to begin with in this case. On top of that, it's not going to be as much new testimony as we're going to get a very similar case if this goes back to trial. The defense believes they did enough to exonerate Alex Murdaugh. There was no direct physical evidence connecting him to the scene. The biggest thing were the videos that had him in the kennels where Maggie and Paul were killed, just minutes, really half an hour, if not less, before those murders happened. But there's no direct physical evidence to tie him to this. There's cell phone evidence. There's many things that they used that was technical, but they say there's nothing that directly connects Alec to actually having a gun in his hand and shooting both his wife and son. So they're going to go immediately back to that. The evidence now the prosecution will have to go back to is everything they presented for, the technical evidence. Is it enough? Do they have to find more or find a better way to present this to make sure this jury agrees? Or do they believe they still did enough, despite the apparent tampering by Becky Hill, to get this conviction? And then we're talking about the financial crimes, the numerous financial crimes that he committed that they said actually led to this murder, because he was about to be exposed in this case for the millions he stole from his clients. How much of that will be allowed back into the next trial, and how much of a difference did it make with the jurors who did originally find him guilty outside of what the claims are when it comes to tampering? So there are a lot of questions still to be had, and the other one would be, will this trial go on at all? We're talking about a lot of time, a lot of money expended on this, and does the state need to do it again when Alec is already sentenced to go behind bars in federal prison for dozens upon dozens of years? And they may pass on that. It may come down to the families to talk about that. It may come down to the state itself going, is this something that is right for the taxpayers to pay? But right now, Alex Murdaugh is in line for a new trial. We don't know yet if that would mean he'd actually get out of jail as well, which is still a question from the state side, or would they transfer him directly to federal jail for now? So there's still a lot of questions, because this came out just a few moments ago. But the biggest statement is the Supreme Court said on multiple levels, Alex Murdaugh deserves a new trial and did not get a fair one in Colleton County just a few years ago.
All right. Thank you, Andrew, so much for that report. Of course, we'll continue to update you on this story, and you can see any of our previous stories on the month-long process on our website by going to WSAV.com/Murdaugh Appeal. We'll have much more throughout the day. Join us right back here in just a few moments for WSAV News 3 today at 11. Until then, we return to your regular programming.